When it comes to upgrading your suspension, the question always boils down to lowering springs or coilovers. And whenever you ask people this, usually they'll say save up for coilovers. Or if you have a newer car and you have those adjustable springs that are designed to work with your existing shocks that are still brand new, then some people would say it's worth it to try out those lowering springs. One, because they will save you money, they'll reduce that wheel gap, and they're also going to work with your EDC. So, what is actually the right answer? And I'm probably one of those people who will fall into the camp of yes, if you can, save up for coilovers. But my opinion has changed a little bit since I've actually installed my KWs on the M235i. And so I'm not so headstrong on coilovers are absolutely better if you can afford it. Of course, if you're just dedicating your car as a show car, or if you are pretty much okay with one set height for your lowering springs, or if you're fortunate enough to have a chassis that will allow you to have the adjustable springs, then that's a good middle road of coilovers and lowering springs that give you just one height adjustment. So at least you have some options. Companies like KW offer adjustable springs. H&R is starting to roll out with some of that. And my friends over at SV Bimmer are actually going to put an AST lowering spring, adjustable lowering spring kit on a G80 tomorrow. So there are more and more companies that are trying to offer that level of adjustment when it comes to lowering springs, because they know that people don't necessarily want to spring for coilovers. And if they have a brand new car, those struts are still good. Give me 1 second. Sorry, that's my continuous battery giving my camera a little bit of problems. But all in all, what we really want is a better handling car and a better looking car. And whatever suspension setup that you decide to get will do that for you. The stiffer spring should give you a little bit more of traction, should give you more traction on the road, I should say, than the stock springs at the very least. They'll also reduce the wheel gap. However, depending on what wheel and tire setup you have, that 1 point of adjustment that it drops you at might be too low and cause you to rub. And sometimes fender rolling can get rid of this issue, but depending on where you're rubbing, it won't completely solve that problem. And yes, I know that a lot of people are just saying, I want it for the looks, I'm not going to have the car for that long. And the car will look pretty good. It'll get rid of the wheel gap. It'll improve your aerodynamics slightly. So you get a better handling car, even if you do just springs. But I really would argue that if you're going to do springs, try to spring for the adjustable ones. That way you can fine tune it as you play with your wheel and tire setup, as you do some other modifications. Because in my case, the KWs with the Vorschlag hammer plates, even at the highest setting, was way too low. So I had to do things like things that I already wanted to do. It wasn't like I had to do it in order to make it fit, but these were things that were like on my to-do list. It just kind of expedited me doing them. But in the front, it was too low. I was scraping, and so I got the GTS hood, which dropped me about 20 pounds. And then I got the Wagner intercooler. That dropped me about another 9 pounds from my VRSF one. So all in all, I had to shave off about 30 pounds, and then I was good. And that was good on an 18 by 8.5 with a 35 offset wheel, all the way up to a 225/40 tire. And even the 245/35 tire would fit. It wasn't until I went to the all-season 4s, the Michelins that come in a 235/40, where I started to have real rubbing issues. Not just along the fender, because even after rolling that, I still had problems towards the front here. So if you guys look at this M2, kind of right above where the side marker is, nearly right where the fender meets the bumper. That area, pretty much from that line, or even just above that line, down to right about where the marker is, that's kind of where I was rubbing. And so in order to fix that, I either had to do spacers, which KW does make, but they recommended against it for the EDC. They said that the technology in the EDCs, at least in the ones that I have, are kind of finicky, and so it's best to not play with it. And then I asked about spring rates. They said, it's best to not get a shorter spring, but it's fine if you change the spring rate, which is kind of tough if you only have 1 inch of adjustability there. Your car is going to raise up. So it'll go from something like on the bottom here to something on the top. And that's not something that I necessarily wanted to do. I was very adamant that I had to do something with my springs if a spacer up here wasn't going to work. And I know that a lot of people would say, like, this is a very expensive coilover system. It's coming around. My setup is close to $5,000 when you factor in that these coilovers are about $35. You add on the tax, and then the Vorschlag camber plates were north of, actually, they were like $600 almost after tax. Tax and shipping for everything at my door was almost $5,000. And then I'm going to replace that with $300 lowering springs. Although Swift is a good company, it's like I paid a lot of money for this. And then I could have just went with, cheaper springs. So that was a little bit of a barrier for me to break. I was like, do I really want to do this? And then I did some research and found out that most of the R&D, as far as KW is concerned, goes into the strut. They do pair them with pretty soft springs overall, but most of the R&D goes into the strut. So most of that $3,500, I would say, probably like, at least $3,000 of that is going into the shock itself, not just the EDC system. But KW is one of those companies where you adjust the height by adjusting the preload on the spring. And they're one of those companies that believes that, or they did a lot of R&D into the height of their strut and the internals of the strut. And they found that it was not beneficial to change the height of the strut body. For whatever reason, that's just their philosophy as a company. Even Bilstein does this. It's, like you get up there to a company like Olin's where you can adjust the strut body instead. But this was an issue because I wasn't rubbing when it was static. I was rubbing not even at speed bumps or driveways because I can take those slow. It's when the road is really bumpy and I can't control that, especially if I'm on like the freeway. I can't just slow down because I'm about to hit like an uneven stretch of road. So it was starting to eat away at my tires, and I said, you know what, forget it. Although I've been adamant about doing coilovers, I've done them on a friend's 228i. Even my own car had this exact setup, the EDC. My buddy's over here, he had the KW V1s, which I still recommend as probably like the best overall suspension setup for a daily driver. It doesn't cost all that much when you compare it to other coilovers in the same market, and you have the lifetime warranty. And so because KW would not recommend using the spacers, I started searching forums and eventually landed on Swift. A lot of people have been doing the Swift upgrade where you upgrade the spring, and because of the diameter of the strut, it can take in this 60 millimeter spring, but you're also going to need a new spring perch. So I reached out to Vorschlag again, partnered up with both Swift and Vorschlag to come up with a solution that ultimately I started out with this. But as you can see, the spring perch is pretty much all the way up. And this is the only way that I could have gotten preload on the spring. Otherwise, I would have had a huge amount of gap here. And the bad thing is that when I lowered it, it had too much of a gap. Now, I don't have any pictures of the wheel gap before and after because that video will be out tomorrow. So make sure to pay attention for the release of the conversion video tomorrow. I didn't want to do any too many pre-releases today, so that video won't get ruined. But in order to fix this, again, the issue was this spring here is about 2.25 inches shorter. And I was very hesitant on doing this. But when I called up Swift, they said, you know, trust us. We've done this a bunch of times. This is the right spring. This is the right spring rate for your struts, for your car. I said, okay. And because I had that huge gap, I was fortunate enough that Swift also sent over some helper springs, which were actually intended to be for the rear. So I'm actually going to do a conversion in the rear as well, but I did the fronts first because I was rubbing in the front. And this adds about 2.4 to, it's about 0.8 when it's fully compressed of height to this spring, which is good because at full droop, you'll get the full 2.4 inches in order to take up the slack to give you the preload. Helper springs don't really change the overall spring rate all that much. And then once it's compressed down, when the car is fully lowered, it will only expand once the suspension elongates again. But for the most part, it kind of acts as a spacer. But the good thing that I like about this is that it's a modular spacer, right? KW, I think they offer springs. I forget the metric sizes, but they offer them in basically 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1 inch variants. That means you're pretty much stuck there. And what you would be doing at that point in time is when you put the spacer on, and depending on how much preload you put into the spring, you're changing somewhat the dynamics of the spring because it's going to be a little more or a little less compressed. But again, that will always depend on how heavy the car is. There's a lot of kind of math involved here. And unless you're really into that, I would really suggest going to places like forums, calling up Swift, calling up KW, just get the numbers from them, ask if they have any experience with conversions or things like that for your car, for your strut model. And if you do call KW, you're going to need the strut model for your car. So that way they can provide you with the most accurate information, because there's very slight differences in their springs. So for example, the spring rate on my car that I just took off, it's a progressive spring, but they average it out. It's about 20 pounds stiffer than what comes on the V3s for the F30 chassis. So you can see like that's a very, you would think that they would just use the same spring because it's so close, but it's a very minute difference. So knowing the exact model of your strut when you call KW will help you out, dial in the best fitment. And KW is actually very helpful with this. Like they're very open about it. You call, you ask like, hey, you know, can I know the inner diameter, the spring rate, the spring length? They have all the information for you. You call that 1-800 number and they'll give you all the information that you want for your setup. They'll even tell you like what they told me, like, we don't really recommend this, but you could do it, you know, but it kind of falls outside of the warranty. So just be aware of that. But again, when you file your warranty, you know, keep your old springs is what I'm saying. Keep your old springs, take a picture. And usually what they're saying is if you get a spring that's too short and it's not stiff enough, you could bottom out the strut. So in my case, there's, like I said, there's quite a bit of math involved. But when you do the conversion of this 2.4 inches to this main spring, you know, even if you dial in the preload and it comes down a little bit because this is adjustable, you're getting about the same height as the KW spring. And so long as you operate within the same KW parameters, you should be fine. Because this is a stiffer spring, I would say once you go down to the lowest point of KW, I would say really just be careful. So in my case, it's the pinch bolt to the it's the pinch bolt to the top of the spring perch. They say anywhere from 7.5 to 8.5 inches we have of adjustability here. I started out at 7.75 just to be very safe. It had a little bit too much wheel gap for me. I could tell like I didn't have as good traction as I did before. So what I did was I went down a couple more spins, 5 in total. And right now I'm at 7.4 inches from top of spring perch to pinch bolt. And now the car has a lot more grip in the front and it's very noticeable. So it handles very well. If I wanted to for aesthetics, I could go down a little bit more. But at this point, I'm probably going to wait and see how it feels and compare it to the rear. At that point, like at this point where the car is right now, I don't really care about the aesthetics. Like it's good enough. Like I don't just sit and stare at my car. My car's not a show car. So at this point, once I put on the stiffer springs in the rear, I'm going to see what I really want as far as the car's dynamics. And then from there, I'll either lower the rear a little bit more or lower the front a little bit more. And for frame of reference, when you go down, or this is when you go down, the car will get lowered. So essentially you'll have, it depends on the spring rate too. I just thought about it. To a certain degree, bringing the car down lower will give you more traction because this spring here will want to expand fully, right? So if you think about it, what's easier for the spring to press outward, the top of the chassis or just the bottom of the wheel assembly? The wheel assembly is going to be lighter than the top portion of the car. For the 2 Series, if you look on forums, they're saying that anywhere, like the 2 front sides are probably close to like 950 pounds each, give or take. And the rears are like closer to like 850. And that's more or less empty, right? You have to factor in, you're going to be on the front left corner if you're in the US, or, you're going to be in one of the front corners. And if you have any storage in the back, you have to account for that weight as well. So it's a near 50-50 distribution, but essentially the lower down, the lower you bring your car, you should get more traction because the spring is really trying to press down on the wheel assembly versus the top of the car. I would say I tried it when I did it at the 7 3/4 portion. And when I went down to like 2 spins and it was like in between that and the 7.4, it wasn't that noticeable, but I did really notice a difference when I went down to 7.4 to the initial setting. So if you go down like 1 or 2 spins, it might not be noticeable, but if you go down something like 5 spins, it's definitely noticeable then. So I would say when you're doing something like this, when you're going from a linear spring to a progressive spring, just expect that you're going to give up some of that comfort because there's some of that take up by the spring, and then your chassis will essentially and the wheel assembly will come together. They'll kind of like squish together to provide that comfort. Whereas now, if you increase the spring rate so much, the entire car will move nearly as one unit versus 2 separate things that are trying to cushion the impact. So there is a slight trade-off, but it's a whole lot better than rubbing. And if you're already doing things like camber plates, coilovers, I would say it's negligible. In my area, like the bad roads are so bad, it doesn't really matter. Like if you have good suspension or not, you're going to like go up and down all over the place. And for like driveway speed bumps, if your car's lowered, you're taking it at such a low speed anyways, you're not really going to notice. You're just going to notice that you have clearance when it's time to like either come down the driveway, go up the driveway, or, you know, vice versa for the speed bumps. But in my case, if you guys have the 2 Series, I went from an 8 kg spring, which is nearly double the spring rate of the KWs. And I think it's fine. I looked on forums and I found that somebody who tracked their 2 Series actually started at a 9 kg spring and went up. So I would say like this is probably like the upper threshold of what's streetable, depending on your strut. So the gas forces and piston forces of your coilover should somewhat match your springs, because basically they're designed to work together. If you have the spring that's not really compressing, but the shock wants to compress, or vice versa, it's not really going to work out. So in my time with this system, it's worked out quite well. I know that the person that I'm referencing, we can actually pull it up. I think that they had V3s on their car. So let me pull that up right here really quick, and we'll even address some questions here. Hi, how's it going, man? I see that you changed your username and you've done some home improvement stuff lately. I hope you're doing well, man. I hope the 2 Series is treating you well. I am debating right now if to get lowering springs or coilovers. I may just get the lowering springs and new shocks. Yeah, you could. You could do something like, you don't have to get KWs, right? It's just, you know, I'm partnered with SU Bimmer, and one of their distributors is KW, so it's easy for them to get the coilovers, like as far as delivery time and hassle. So it's in theory, it's easy for me. It's also, from what I found, KWs are easier to process the warranty, and they're also faster when it comes to those claims. So you could go with something like a Bilstein, I think it's a B14, buy just the shock, and then buy the lowering spring separate. You just have to make sure that the inner diameter of the spring is compatible with the strut that you're getting, and then buy the perch. And we can actually price that out. So let me see here. I will, let's see here. So let's price that out. So I think you have the F, if I'm not mistaken, you don't have EDC, right? So like, let's say you wanted to go to KW V1 F22. Right here, you're looking close to $2,000 once you factor in tax and shipping and all that other stuff. Of course, that's going to depend on where you live. But let's open up another tab here and see. Oh, the B14s only come in a kit, huh? I thought they came... Well, actually, these are cheaper. The B14s are... Oh, they're under... So what you could do is, yeah, I mean, you could spring for the B14 kit. I'm trying to see if you can get just the shocks. The B16s. Oh, these are still a progressive spring. So, yeah. I don't know how they look linear, but I guess, I mean, they said that they're progressive, so I'll take them at their word. So this is like a kit that you could go with. Like this is after tax, like, oh, and it's a lifetime replacement. So we're talking like maybe under 1,500 here. This is what I would say like you could do. You could always get so yeah, you're talking like $300. If you get adjustables, it's like $600. I would say a kit like this is fine. I mean, and you get lifetime replacement. Like this is a good deal. Is this just the front? Oh, these are just the fronts. Okay. Take it back then. You could go with this. You could go with this and then upgrade the springs later on. You're just going to need a different spring perch when the time comes. Let's see. All of these use the OEM spring perch design. Yeah, if you're gonna get like a Swift spring, or there's like Hypercoil, there's all these other companies out there. They use like 60 millimeter diameter usually. They do have like some variants like 2.5 or like 2 3/4 inch. But using the OEM perch is not really gonna get you to make that adaptable. Oh, let's see here. B14 fitment 97 2000. No, wrong car. Yeah, I would say like you could try to just get a strut and spring separately, and maybe that'll save you money. Let's see here. I'll try to find that other the spot on forums for the springs as well as we're going through the Q&As here. Coilovers, so pit 63, coilover over springs every time if you're driving on mountain roads. Yeah, I mean, that'd be fun. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I mean, overall, I would say like coilovers is probably the way to go. Like the OEM struts are very like soft. They're made for comfort, right? They're made for comfort, compliance, so you don't rub, so that there's no issues. Basically, the parameters are very safe to sell a car, meaning that the customer's not going to come back and say, "Oh, I'm rubbing," or come back and say, "Oh, it's too stiff," right? Marketing and the sellability of a car is always going to supersede like performance when it comes to any big brand, actually any car at all. It's sad to say, but you know, the enthusiasts, the performance aspects of the car are pretty much out the window nowadays. It's like, what is sellable? Like, what can we sell the most of? What's easiest for us to sell? Use the lowering spring. Need more travel on shock, damper, cut down bump rubber. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's well, you're essentially starting with the strut somewhat already engaged because it's a lowering spring, but because it is a stiffer spring, maybe like the remaining travel is about the same. It depends. So like say if in total your strut compresses, I'm going to make it easy, like this is not the real case, right? But I'm just using easy numbers here. Let's say the strut compresses 15 inches. But your lowering springs bring you down 5 inches, but they only compress 10 inches. Your strut still is within its optimal stroke range. It's still operating within the safe distance for it to operate. It won't prematurely bottom out. So that's the thing that you'll have to factor in. And yes, you'll probably have to change out the bump stop, because usually it doesn't work out that way, right? Like that's an optimal situation where they say our springs can work with the OEM struts. when companies say that, you should feel pretty safe with going with them, that maybe they'll provide you with a new bump stop. If not, then you can use your OEM one, but your OEM ones shouldn't have premature wear because those springs are designed to stop the strut at the same place where they would have stopped at for the OEM springs. And the way that they do that is by making a stiffer spring. They don't let it compress as much because its height is already lowered from OEM. Try going downhill braking before the corner. Okay, so Pit 63, it sounds like you're a much more experienced driver than I am. So I think we have, it sounds like some professional advice here. But yeah, usually before you take a turn, you want to decelerate a little bit, but it seems like, let's see here. You have a few more comments, so let's see if you address that. All that cost savings on the spring, then spending all the money on carbon hood, fender spacers, wheel and tire. Yeah. I would say definitely wheels and tires are first, right? Even before the suspension, wheels and tires are first. Your suspension is probably fine enough as it is, even if it's a little worn out. But you need good rubber on the road. If your wheels are dent and cracked, then your tires aren't really going to grab onto anything. So the structural integrity of your wheels need to be good, and the condition of your tires need to be good before you start addressing things more inward and upward from that. All right, so I'd say wheels and tires first, then we move inward to the suspension, as well as brakes. Brakes are very important. So I'd say wheels, tires, brakes, suspension. All right. And then, all the maintenance things as well. Just saw your chat here. I said hi from Taiwan, land of coilovers. BC Racing's from Taiwan, right? Well, hi. I think you're the first person from Taiwan, or at least to let me know that you're from Taiwan. So, welcome in. I think this is the first time that you're here with us. So, thank you for coming in. Welcome. Hi, hey Fritz. Yeah, I was thinking of going to coilovers, but think I'd go with lowering springs instead. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it really all depends on what you want to do with your car. What's the purpose of your car? If lowering springs are going to be the best thing for you, then, ultimately, there's always going to be people on the internet that say you should have done the other thing, like do the complete 180, but they don't know your situation. And so if you think that lowering springs are the best for you, or if you change your mind and go back to coilovers from where you were before, then ultimately, as long as you're happy, the purpose of that modification fulfills its desired purpose, then no problem. The only thing I would say is like coilovers, at least they give you the room to kind of have more adjustability, right? So in my car, if I got the lowering springs and then I said, oh, you know what? I wish I got the coilovers. So I would have been out the $300 that it is for the springs, right? So let's see here. How do I want to do this? Let's do this. So let's say I went with some H&Rs, $300. Okay, I wanted to go with the H&Rs. Oh man, okay. I wish I had gotten the coilovers, so I could have spent anywhere from $1,000, and then I would have had to spend a few more hundred to get the EDC delete kit, or I would have gotten the ones that I had for like, $3,500 or whatever, only to find out that I needed some other lowering springs. And then from there, I would have had to spend another $300, a different set for more camber plates. So basically what I'm saying is I would have spent everything that I would have spent plus another set of lowering springs. The lowering springs won't be able to necessarily adapt to anything else, but at least like your struts from your coilovers can adapt different springs so long as the diameter supports it. So depending on, I mean, but that also depends on how long you plan to keep your car for. Like if you don't plan to keep the car for all that long, then all this stuff doesn't really matter. So you do have some backwards compatibility with coilovers if you change your mind. Like say, I need stiffer springs, I need lower springs, and things like that. With lowering springs overall, you just you don't have that backwards compatibility. Pit 63. It's such an art to get the ride height, spring rate, damping. Good luck. From a Supra / M2 comp owner and GR86 / GR Yaris, E30 Touring, Alpine and B3. Man, you've had a lot of cars. Which one of those is your favorite out of all those? And I mean, I appreciate the support. I mean, especially with someone who is well versed with so many different well handling cars. It's a very impressive lineup. Yeah. Hyde, indeed. I was busy with home renovations and wanted to brand name that could last and easy to process and remember. The 2 has been solid. I am now on a road to more power. Okay, right on. I'm actually working with, I can't talk about it too much right now, but I am partnering with a company that has supposedly, it might not necessarily be the most powerful tune out there, but they're advertising it as the how did they phrase it? It's like the most power that's safe for that engine. So like the N20, N26 platform, it is the safest, most powerful tune for those engines because, you know, the timing chain issues and all that, even if you did the replacement for it. So just be on the lookout. I'll have something for you, man. Oh, you're from Jersey. Okay. Did you go to Key's show this year? Elliot, Fritz, I'm taking my 328i to the dealership in San Francisco tomorrow to deal with my burning oil issue. We'll have details for you next week. Okay. Wow, you're taking it to the dealership. I would, I mean, if you're comfortable going to them, that's fine. But if you're just going with them out of pure convenience, I would, I don't know any shops in San Francisco. If anybody can help out Elliot, if any of you guys are here in the San Francisco Bay Area, particularly in San Francisco itself, and have like a reputable BMW specialist to shout out, please do. Elliot, if you are here in the East Bay, I would recommend my shop to you. If I'm not mistaken, dealership labor, it's like $300 an hour. But yeah, either way, whatever you choose, man, let me know. I hope it's not that bad. Hi, good luck, Elliot. Yeah, same. Okay, right on. Devin said, things to know if I wanted to lower my E46 325 XI. These cars, there's so much information out there already, like on forums. It's not a chassis that I've actually played with. So I would say your best bet is to go on forums. There's a bunch of people who've tried stuff on the E46 on YouTube. I would say just go with kind of like what's safe, what works. I mean, coilovers for that car are much cheaper than, you know, like the newer cars that have EDC and all that stuff. So you could go with something like coilovers. Bilstein, KW, I think BC makes stuff for that car. So there, like that platform, there's a huge amount of opportunity there. So I would hate to recommend something for that car, but I would say if you already have a friend who can fender roll for you, I would say roll the fenders before you lower the car. Even if you end up not needing it, it's probably, in my opinion, now that I've done it, it's better to roll the fenders before you need to roll the fenders, right? Because there's no detriment to rolling the fenders unless the person does a really bad job and warps the fender. But there's no real detriment to rolling your fenders and not needing it versus lowering the car, your wheels and tires, your tires and potentially your wheels are scraping, and then you need a fender roll. Expert. I do coilovers on an E46, right? Same. I know, right? Installing my Dynon springs right now. Okay, right on. Man, tag me on Instagram or TikTok. I mean, I'd love to see it. I just realized there's a difference between lowering springs and coilovers. Oh. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's just coilovers are the springs plus the dampers. Lowering springs are just the springs. I mean, if you buy your car used, I mean, there's a chance that someone may have upgraded the system already. So, I mean, if they replaced it not too long ago and the strut's still good, you could find springs that will adapt to that strut. Let's see here. Sexy Pinoy 543. Are you from the Bay? Yes. I'm over on the East Bay side, South Bay. Eduardo. Hi Fritz, thanks again for your informative videos. We'll be asking you a few questions closer to my coilover purchase. Not sure which linear springs would match best with which shocks. This one I'm gonna say, like, if you call a company that has like a lot of like time under their belt, like Swift, they usually know. You tell them like, hey, you know, I'm doing V3s, V2s, this is my car. They're going to roughly know like the weight, and they can always look up in their database like, okay, like we've adapted springs for this car before, like here's what it is. Also, if you have a shop that has a lot of time under their belt, like my friends over at SUB, they could give recommendations as well. So it really depends on what struts you decide to end up with, and then what's the purpose of your car? Is it track? Is it street? If it's on the street, do you want it to be a little bit more comfortable, a little bit stiffer? Usually the average spring rate of the progressive spring, you're going to want to go up from that. So whatever spring rate your coilovers come with, you're going to want to go up from that. And then usually, like, you could type in something like your car track build, and you'll find like spring rates for that car. And then from there, you can be like, okay, like that's not where I want to be. So I'll take it down a couple of pings there. And I know that I want to start at least from the spring rate that my car came with. So you'll have a window to operate in. And let's see here. I know that I have that forum post. Here we go. Oh, Elliot, that's right. You have a Sulev car. That's right. I completely forgot. Okay, yeah, never mind. You're good to go then. But I guess if you have anything that's not engine related, like today we're talking about suspension, that's not covered underneath the Sulev. If any of you have a shop that you guys could recommend Elliot for when he has his non-Sulev, I guess, duties to do on his car, please share. Hi, guess I was at Keisha. Yeah, that thing is, one year I'm gonna have to make it out there. It's just I'm on the West Coast, but their events are getting bigger and bigger every year. So I mean, it's kudos to them. I'm glad you made it out this year. We actually had our event. It's called Week Fest here in San Jose, like the week before Key's event. So really quick, we'll take a quick break from the Q&As and we'll jump over here. And so this is the forum post. I don't want to block the original posters, give them credit where credit is due. So let's see here. They ended up with spring rates. So essentially Newton meters and kg, it's a factor of 10. So a 90 Newton meter spring rate is a 9 kg spring essentially. 200 millimeters, you just convert that to inches, and then fronts are 150 Newton meters. So again, you just convert. Oh, sorry, the fronts were a 90 and the rears were 150, which makes sense. You probably want the fronts softer than the rears. And if I'm not mistaken, these are KWV3s. Right here. KWV3s. So this is the good thing about forums. Like you can just, type in like spring upgrade or KW spring upgrade, Bilstein spring upgrade, whatever it is. You type that into like any search engine or even on the forum itself, and you'll get something like this, right? This person even later on said that they actually changed the spring rate. Let's see here. It said that they changed their spring rate at some point in time. So I started at 8 kg spring, so just under this. And if I'm not mistaken, I went to a 14 kg in the rear. So again, it's just one step down from this, and this is a dedicated track car. So if I'm not mistaken, this guy leaves links for all of the things. Oh. Let's see here. Build thread. Let's see. Problems. Oh, here we go. So you can follow the entire build right here. And here it is, stage 1, 2, 3, and then there's, like some stuff was suspension, some stuff was power, some stuff was wheels and tires. So this is like, sometimes the information, it's not necessarily all organized, but this is part of like researching, going on forums. Usually the information is out there. We just have to dig a little bit for it, but it's a whole lot better than like buying springs and then testing them out and then they're not working. Then you have to buy a new one. So it's going to save, although it takes a little bit of time, it's going to save us a lot of money and headache in the long run if we just dig a little bit. So let's see here. This one's on 2 attics. Traction control delete. I like Concord BMW as far as Bay Area dealerships go. Okay, right on. Thanks for the recommendation. Dev'd Inside, thank you. I'll look into a fender roller and coilovers. Realize I'm behind on the live video too. Yeah, no worries, man. It's all good. Fender rolling, honestly, if you plan to do a few, you could get one on eBay. I mean, I made a video on this a little while back, but like all you have to do is like drill out some of the holes. And for like, I would say if you already have the drill, you buy the $10 bit and the roller's like $50. It's $60. So if you're down to do it yourself, you could save a lot of money, and it's probably good. I mean, yeah, it's an Amazon one. It's not like the best built one, but if you plan to do 3 or 4 cars, the $50, you can't go wrong. $50 and like 30 minutes of your time per car, when you consider like getting the car up, cleaning the area to make sure that there's nothing on the inside of the lip so it doesn't press up against the fender, like doing all of that stuff. 30 minutes per car, $50, you really can't beat it. Traction, thanks, I'll try them next. Okay, Well, I'm happy that we could get you some suggestions in there, Elliot. I'm very eager to hear what they tell you about the burning oil or the leak, whatever it ends up being. I hope that whole thing gets sorted out. And I hope that today, everybody, we were able to go over some good resources as far as, where you can look to for, should you do springs? Should you do coilovers? If you do coilovers, do you need stiffer springs? Like, what's a good starting place? If you guys have any recommendations for next week's video, feel free to send me your suggestions on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok at RoomTuber. Hope all of you have a good evening, and I'll see all of you next week.